Today we're going to be reviewing Chapter 7, Section 1, Deviance and Social Control. This is the beginning of a new chapter, so there are some definitions that we need to go through, and most importantly, we need to be able to define what deviance is. So deviance is behavior that departs from societal or group norms. So anytime that you have kind of this social rule, maybe spoken or unspoken, and somebody chooses to take an alternate route or chooses to do something different, that would be considered deviance. And I do want to be very clear that not all deviance is bad, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Behaviors considered deviant can vary from one society to another. So sometimes things that may be acceptable in one country may not be acceptable in another country, and therefore could be considered deviant. An example of that may be like wearing a headscarf or things like that in some Middle Eastern countries. Women then who do not would be considered deviant. So we're going to talk about negative deviance and positive deviance. Negative deviance involves behavior that underconforms to accepted norms. So the example here is someone who rejects norms, misinterprets the norms, or is unaware of the norms. A really good real-life example of this would be somebody who travels to another country, and when they get there, they don't know necessarily what kind of the social rules are, and they may break some of those things, but not intentionally. So there could be, they're just not aware of it, or maybe they misinterpret it. So if they see somebody else do something and they also try to do that behavior, but it's not necessarily acceptable for a newcomer to perform that behavior, that could be considered negative deviance. And then obviously someone who just outright rejects the norm. So somebody who knows what society's rules are, but chooses to not go along with them. Positive deviance, on the other hand, involves behavior that over-conforms to social expectations. So trying to be perfect, like a model, to the point that it is unhealthy. So the example, if you're thinking of like a model, like a runway model or something like that, these women or even men who model for different companies, may be very thin and look almost perfect, and people who try to emulate that without considering the fact that maybe technology may have played a part in that image with Photoshop and things like that, they may try to look or be just like that to the point that it becomes unhealthy for them physically, or trying to just be almost that model citizen to the point where they kind of lose themselves in the process and it becoming an unhealthy situation. Now, when we talk about deviance, we have to talk about a person who breaks significant society or group norms, and that person themselves is called a deviant. So make sure that you understand that a person who breaks those rules is oftentimes called a deviant. All right, so reasons why we have societal control is because without it, people would kind of just do their own thing, and while that may not necessarily sound bad, some of society's norms are there to make sure that people remain safe. So we have societal control to encourage conformity to society's norms. And there are two types of this. There are internal social control and there's external social control. So internal social control is the individual adjusts their behavior based on the social norms they have learned or are learning. So this is what the individual themselves is going to do. So if, let's say that a teenager makes a bad choice and maybe just feels really guilty about it and changes that without necessarily being punished for it, that guilty conscience type of example, this would be considered internal social control. So what internally is happening to that individual to make them change their behavior. External, on the other hand, are things that are happening outside of that person. So these are not the feelings of the individual who broke the rules. These are things that are consequences that are inflicted on that person, whether positive or negative, based on decisions that have been made. And we then talk about social sanctions. And social sanctions are rewards or punishments that encourage conformity to social control or social norms. Positive sanctions are used to encourage conformity. So if you have a child that you are trying to potty train, you may give them a little treat every time they use the restroom, and things like that. And that would be a positive sanction. So you know, it's normal for people to use the restroom rather than living in a diaper their entire life or using the restroom outside. And so that they may be trying to encourage conformity of using the restroom by giving positive rewards. Negative sanctions, on the other hand, intend to stop socially unacceptable behavior. So the example your textbook gives is like prison. Another example could be a teenager who maybe stays out too late. Their parents might ground them or take away privileges, and that would be a negative sanction. So something that try to stop the unaccepted behavior. Informal sanctions are those that are not necessarily written in law or written as rules, but these are things where, you know, if somebody makes a poor decision and everyone starts talking about that person, that's kind of that informal sanction, that when that person hears that people are talking about them, that may encourage them to change their behavior because they don't necessarily want to be the topic of discussion. And not to say that that's a good thing, not to say gossiping is a good thing, but that is considered an informal sanction. There's no rule that says that that's going to happen. On the other hand, though, formal sanctions, these are legal or institutional consequences used to punish behavior. So detention or Saturday school, jail time, prison, community service, a ticket, things like that. Those are all formal sanctions where there are actually rules in place that say these are the consequences of not conforming to the rules. Okay? All right. So that is the end of Chapter 7, Section 1. You may now continue to the next step.